She raised her brother's children for 20 years. She gave them her home, her love, her life, but when the will was read, they turned on her. And the deeper she dug, the more she uncovered: lies, betrayal, and a secret buried under an old tree that could destroy them all. Before we continue, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more stories like this. The rain came down hard that morning, the kind of rain that soaked through your coat and made the earth smell heavy and raw. Maggie Allison stood at the edge of the grave, her black umbrella tilting in the wind, her shoes sinking slightly into the wet grass. The coffin was dark walnut, polished so smooth it almost glistened under the grey sky. But the rain spots dulled the shine. It didn't seem right, Maggie thought. Her brother, Daniel, had been a man who loved brightness, light in the kitchen, sun on the crops, the warm glow of the fireplace in winter. He should have had a sunny day for his farewell, not this cold, soaked burial. She shifted her gaze. Jonathan, only 12, stood stiffly at the other side of the grave. His dark hair stuck to his forehead, and he clutched something small in his fist, a glint of metal in the grey light. He kept his eyes forward, not looking at anyone. Emily was only 8, and she clung to Maggie's coat, her small hands gripping the wool. Every so often she sniffled, but she didn't cry much. She had cried herself empty in the days before. The pastor spoke words Maggie couldn't really hear. The rain hitting the umbrella drowned them out. Or maybe she just wasn't listening. Her mind was far away, remembering things she couldn't stop replaying. Daniel's last phone call to her had been strange. "Mags," he'd said, his voice rough. "If anything ever happens to me." She had cut him off. "Don't talk like that, Danny. You're fine. Just tired." But he'd paused too long before changing the subject. Now he was in the ground. When the pastor finally stepped back, everyone moved forward to toss a handful of dirt onto the coffin. Maggie took Emily's hand and guided her to the edge. The girl let the dirt fall, then stepped back quickly, biting her lip hard. Jonathan came next. He didn't take the dirt. He just stared down for a long moment, his hand still in his pocket, gripping that shiny object. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Maggie to wonder what he was holding so tightly. By the time everyone else had gone, only Maggie and the children remained. The workers were waiting politely a few steps back, ready to finish filling the grave. Maggie crouched so she could look Emily in the eyes. "It's going to be all right, sweet girl. I promise you. I'm here now." Emily's eyes were red. "You're not going to leave us, right?" "Never," Maggie said, brushing the girl's wet hair back from her face. "You're my family. Both of you. I'll take care of you." Jonathan was standing a few feet away, staring at the muddy ground. He didn't turn when Maggie spoke to him. "Jonathan, did you hear me? You're safe with me." "I heard," he said finally, his voice flat. "Doesn't matter. The land's what matters." Maggie frowned. "The land." He looked at her then, his gaze steady. "Dad said the Hawthorne farm has to stay in the family. No matter what." Maggie straightened, meeting his eyes. "It will. I'll make sure of it." Jonathan gave a small nod, then turned away again. But his hand was still in his pocket, and Maggie could see his fingers moving slightly, like he was tracing the edges of whatever he was holding. The wind picked up. The old hawthorn tree at the edge of the cemetery swayed and creaked, its dark branches twisting in the storm. Maggie felt a strange chill, one that had nothing to do with the weather. She looked down at the fresh mound of dirt and whispered to Daniel, "I'll protect them. And I'll protect this land. No matter the cost." Somewhere behind her, Jonathan's grip on the object in his pocket tightened. Time has a way of folding itself when you're too busy to notice. 1 year bled into the next, and before Maggie knew it, 2 decades had passed. She never married. She told herself it was because she was too busy running the farm and raising the children, but the truth was more complicated. The farm was her anchor, and Jonathan and Emily were her world. There was no space left for anyone else. The first years were hard. Money was tight, and the mortgage on the land was a shadow that hung over every harvest. Maggie worked the fields herself, hauling hay, fixing fences, and planting rows until her back ached. She took in sewing jobs on the side to make ends meet. She refused to sell even an acre of the land, no matter how tempting some offers became. The children grew. Jonathan shot up tall and lean, his shoulders broadening before his voice had even deepened. He was clever, too, could fix a broken tractor engine in a day, could negotiate a better deal at the market without batting an eye. But he also had a certain coldness, a way of looking at people like he was always calculating something. Emily was softer, more open. She loved baking with Maggie in the kitchen, laughed easily, and talked about dreams of becoming a teacher. She was the one who remembered birthdays, who helped Maggie hang laundry in the summer and string lights in the winter. But even Emily had secrets sometimes. Maggie would catch her staring out the window at night, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold, her expression unreadable. One autumn evening when Jonathan was 16 and Emily 12, Maggie came in from feeding the chickens to find Jonathan in the living room with a stack of papers. "What's all that?" she asked, taking off her boots. "Farm records," he said. "Just looking at how much this land is worth now." Maggie froze halfway through unbuttoning her coat. "Why?" "Just curious." He didn't look up. "It's a lot, Maggie. A lot more than you think." "It's not about money, Jonathan," she said firmly. "This land has been in the family for generations. Your father is gone," Jonathan said sharply, looking up at her. His eyes were darker than usual. "And one day, this place will be ours. Me and Emily's. You know that, right?" Maggie's stomach tightened. "This place will be yours when I'm gone. Until then, it's my responsibility to take care of it. And you." Jonathan just smirked faintly, like she'd said something naive. "Sure. Until then." From the kitchen doorway, Emily's voice broke the tension. "Dinner's ready." Jonathan pushed the papers into a folder and stood. But as he walked past Maggie, she noticed the faint jingle of metal in his pocket. The same way she had at the funeral all those years ago. Life went on. Jonathan graduated and went to college in the city. He came back for summers at first, then only for Christmas, and eventually just for quick visits. Emily went to a local college, staying in touch with Maggie almost daily. Sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet, Maggie would think about Daniel's death. About the rumors she'd overheard, that the brake line on his tractor had been sliced clean, not worn through like the police report claimed. She'd told herself it was nonsense. An accident. That was all. But every time Jonathan visited and she heard that faint metallic jingle in his pocket, she couldn't stop the cold shiver down her spine. That sets the stage for everything that's going to come next. The rift, the legal fight, the buried secrets. The Hawthorne farmhouse had always been warm in winter. Maggie liked it that way, with crackling in the fireplace, steam rising from the kitchen, and the smell of something roasting in the oven. It made the whole place feel safe, as if the outside world couldn't get in. That night, she had gone all out, roast beef with gravy, mashed potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie cooling on the counter. Jonathan was home for the first time in nearly 6 months, and Emily had come straight from work, still wearing her teacher's cardigan and sensible shoes. The three of them sat around the big oak table. At first, it felt almost like old times. Emily laughed about one of her students asking if teachers lived at school. Jonathan told a quick, polished story about a deal he'd closed for a client in the city. He was wearing a dark suit jacket even here, in the middle of the country, as if he'd just stepped out of a meeting. Maggie kept smiling, but she noticed something different in him, something sharper. His eyes seemed to measure the room, the furniture, even her. Like he was calculating value. Halfway through the meal, Jonathan set down his fork. "There's something I've been meaning to talk to you about," he said. Maggie's hands paused over the serving dish. "All right. What's on your mind?" Jonathan glanced at Emily. She nodded slightly, like they'd already discussed it. "We've been looking at the numbers," he began. "The land. You know it's worth a lot more than it used to be. Developers are offering good money, enough to set all of us up for life." Maggie's chest tightened. Developers. She looked from one to the other. You're talking about selling the land? Not all of it, Jonathan said smoothly. Just a section. We could build luxury homes near the creek. They'd pay top dollar for property like this. It's an opportunity. It's not an opportunity, Maggie said, her voice firm. It's our family land. Your father worked himself to the bone to keep it. So did I. Emily shifted uncomfortably. Maggie, maybe we should at least consider it. The money could help you, too. You've done everything for us. You deserve to be comfortable. I am comfortable, Maggie said. I have the land. I have this house. I don't need more. Jonathan leaned forward, his elbows on the table. It's not just about you, Maggie. This is our inheritance. Dad left it for us. You've been looking after it, but… Her hand tightened on her fork. Your father left me the responsibility to raise you and protect this place. That's exactly what I've done. Selling it to strangers isn't protecting it. Jonathan's voice cooled. You can't keep it forever. Times change. I can keep it until I'm gone, she said flatly. The silence that followed was heavy. The only sound was the faint ticking of the old wall clock. Emily looked down at her plate. Jonathan's gaze didn't leave Maggie's face. If you won't listen now, maybe you will when it's on paper. What does that mean? She asked. Just that we've been talking to someone, he said. A lawyer. Maggie stared at him, her stomach twisting. You're threatening me in my own home. Jonathan leaned back, expression unreadable. I'm telling you we want what's ours. Emily said softly, It's not like that. Yes, it is, Maggie said, standing suddenly. Her chair scraped against the floor. I gave you everything. My time. My work. My life. And this is what I get in return? You want to carve up the land like it's meat on a plate. Jonathan didn't answer. He just reached for his glass of water and took a slow sip. Maggie stood there for a long moment, looking at both of them. Emily looked away first. Jonathan didn't. Dinner ended in silence. That night, Maggie couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the way Jonathan had said our inheritance as if she were a caretaker holding on to something that didn't belong to her. The words felt like a blade between her ribs. She went to the window and looked out at the moonlit fields. The land stretched quiet and endless, just as it had when she was a child. But for the first time, she felt it wasn't safe. A week later, Maggie was sorting the morning mail at the kitchen table when she saw the envelope. It was heavier than usual, the paper thick, the address typed neatly. The return address was from a law firm in the city. Her hands were cold as she tore it open. The letter was short and brutally clear. Jonathan and Emily Allison were contesting her right to keep the Hawthorne property. The letter claimed that Danielsville had never transferred ownership to Maggie, only guardianship of the children. Now that both were adults, they wanted control of the estate. Maggie read it twice, then a third time, each word hitting harder than the last. They had actually done it. They had gone to a lawyer behind her back. She picked up the phone and called Emily first. It rang twice before she answered. Maggie. Hey, I was just… What is this? Maggie's voice shook as she read the first line of the letter aloud. There was a pause on the other end. You got the letter. Yes, I got the letter, Maggie snapped. Is this true? Are you suing me? It's not suing, exactly, Emily began. Don't you dare play with words. You're trying to take the land. Emily's voice was small. Jonathan says it's what Dad would have wanted. Your father trusted me with this place because he knew I'd protect it. Jonathan is wrong. Maggie, please. But Maggie hung up. She didn't want to hear her finish. That afternoon, Jonathan showed up at the farmhouse without warning. He was wearing a dark coat and scarf, looking every bit the city businessman. Before you start shouting, he said as soon as she opened the door. "I came to explain." "You don't need to explain," Maggie said. "The letter explained plenty." He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "We're just formalizing what's rightfully ours." "This is my home," she said. "I raised you here. I fed you, clothed you, worked this land for 20 years. "That doesn't make it yours," Jonathan cut in. Maggie stared at him. "You were 12 when your father died. Do you even remember the things he told me? The way he made me promise to keep this place safe?" Jonathan's jaw tightened. "I remember him saying the land was for us." "No," Maggie said quietly. "He said it was for the family. That's not the same thing." Jonathan shrugged. "We'll see what the court says." That night, Maggie sat at the kitchen table with the old family records spread out before her. Somewhere in all the paperwork, she was sure of it, was proof. Daniel had been clear in his wishes. But the official will on record left too much room for Jonathan's interpretation. She remembered something then, the small key Jonathan had taken from his father's coat the day of the funeral. She'd never seen it again. If it opened something, some box or drawer, maybe it held the truth. The next morning, Maggie went into Jonathan's old bedroom. He hadn't used it in years, but she kept it tidy out of habit. She checked drawers, the closet, even under the bed. Nothing. Then she saw it. The floorboard near the window was slightly raised. Her heart pounded as she pried it up. Beneath was a shallow space, and inside it, a small wooden box with a brass lock. She lifted it out and held it in her lap. The wood was scratched and worn, but the lock was solid. No key. She thought of Jonathan's pocket that day at the funeral, the way his fingers had moved over the object inside. He had the key. Whatever was in this box, Jonathan had wanted to keep it hidden. That night, she set the box on the table and stared at it for a long time. Her hands itched to break it open. But part of her hesitated. If the box contained something important, like a letter from Daniel, it could change everything. And if it contained something darker, it could destroy everything. The wooden box sat on Maggie's kitchen table for 3 days. She didn't put it away, didn't hide it, didn't even cover it. Every time she passed through the kitchen, she looked at it. It was small enough to hold in her hands, but heavy in a way that made her think whatever was inside was more than paper. The brass lock had tarnished over the years, and there was a faint scratch across the lid, like someone had tried to pry it open once before but stopped. The problem was the key. Maggie knew exactly where it was, Jonathan's pocket, or somewhere he kept his most private things. She remembered the day of the funeral so clearly now it made her stomach twist. The rain, the fresh grave, Jonathan's hand in his pocket, fingers moving over a small, metallic shape. Back then, she told herself it was something harmless, a trinket, maybe a coin. Now, she wasn't so sure. On the 4th day, she decided she couldn't keep waiting. Jonathan had a habit of leaving his briefcase in the living room when he visited. Maggie called him that morning, pretending to be calm, and invited him over for lunch. "I'm making stew," she said. "Haven't seen you in a while." He hesitated. "You didn't invite me to yell at me again, did you?" "You think I'd feed you and yell at you?" she asked lightly. "One at a time, Jonathan." That got a short laugh. "All right. I'll come by." When he arrived, the smell of beef and vegetables simmering in the pot filled the kitchen. Maggie played the role of the cheerful aunt perfectly, pouring him coffee, asking about his work, letting him do most of the talking. Halfway through the meal, she stood and said, "Forgot the pepper. Be right back." She left the kitchen, walked down the hallway, and slipped into the living room. The briefcase was there. She worked fast, knowing she had minutes at most. The locks on it weren't fancy. One flick and she was in. Inside were papers, a leather notebook, and a small velvet pouch. Her heart thudded. She untied the string and felt the cool, smooth shape of a key drop into her palm. It was small, brass, and old, the teeth worn smooth on one side. It looked exactly like she had imagined it would. She closed the briefcase carefully, making sure everything was exactly as she'd found it, and returned to the kitchen. Jonathan looked up from his bowl. "Find your pepper." Maggie smiled. "No. Turns out we're fine without it." That night, when the house was quiet and the wind rattled the shutters, she sat at the kitchen table with the box in front of her. The key slid into the lock with an ease that made her shiver. The click it made when it turned seemed louder than it should have been. She lifted the lid. Inside, there were 3 things. 1. A folded letter, yellowed with age. 2. A small photograph of Daniel, smiling beside the old tractor. 3. A sealed envelope with her name written on it in Daniel's handwriting, Maggie, and beneath that, in smaller letters, "If anything happens to me." Her hands shook as she reached for the envelope. She ran her fingers over the handwriting, remembering Daniel's voice, the way he used to call her Mags when no one else was around. But before she could open it, a shadow fell across the kitchen doorway. Jonathan was standing there. His coat was still on, his hair damp from the night air. "Couldn't wait, could you?" he said. Maggie's fingers tightened around the envelope. "This is mine." He stepped into the room. "It's not yours. It was Dad's. And he gave it to me." "Then why did you hide it?" she asked. Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Because you've always thought you knew best. Maybe I didn't want you twisting whatever's in there into your version of the truth. Or maybe," Maggie said evenly, "you didn't want me to know the truth at all." Jonathan's gaze dropped to the envelope. For a moment, Maggie thought he might try to take it from her. But then he straightened and said, "Go ahead. Read it. You'll see I'm right." Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Slowly, she broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Daniel's handwriting was rushed, uneven, unlike his usual steady script. "Maggie, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. It wasn't an accident. I don't have proof, but I can feel it in my bones. Someone is making sure I don't stand in their way. If it happens, keep the farm. Don't let it go, no matter what they tell you. The land will keep you safe. Trust no one completely, not even family. Daniel." Maggie read it twice before looking up. Jonathan's face was unreadable. "You think that proves something?" "It proves he wanted me to keep the land." "It proves he was paranoid," Jonathan said. "You know how he got when he was stressed." Maggie folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. "This stays with me." Jonathan didn't argue. He just smiled faintly, the way someone might if they thought they'd already won. "Enjoy your letter, Maggie. It won't matter in court." When he left, she locked the box away. But the words kept echoing in her mind. Trust no one completely, not even family. The next day, Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. She needed answers, not just letters and suspicions. She drove into town and parked outside the coffee shop where Emily often went after work. Sure enough, Emily was there, sitting at a corner table with a book. When Emily saw her, she smiled uncertainly. "Maggie." "Hi." Maggie sat down across from her. "We need to talk." Emily set her book aside. "If this is about the letter, Jonathan already told me." "Then you know your father suspected someone might harm him." Emily's face paled slightly. "Maggie, Dad was under a lot of pressure. People say things when they are stressed." "Emily, listen to me. This wasn't just a bad feeling. He was warning me." Emily's eyes darted to the window. "I can't do this right now." "Yes, you can," Maggie said quietly. "If there's something you know, something you've been keeping from me, you need to tell me." Emily hesitated so long that Maggie thought she might get up and leave. Finally, she said, "Jonathan, he told me things about Dad. About how he ran the farm, about deals he made. He said Dad wasn't always honest." "What does that have to do with his death?" Emily's fingers twisted together. "There were arguments. The day before Dad, before the accident. Jonathan came home late. He wouldn't say where he'd been. And when I asked him, He got angry. Really angry. I've never seen him like that. Maggie leaned forward. Emily, if you think Jonathan. Emily shook her head sharply. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, if you knew everything, you might not forgive either of us. Maggie's breath caught. Either of you? Emily, what are you talking about? But Emily stood, gathering her things. I have to go. Emily. Maggie's voice followed her, but Emily didn't look back as she left. That night, the house felt too big, too empty. Maggie sat at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of her, Daniel's words blurring in her vision. She thought about Emily's face when she said either of us. What could Emily have done? And why would she protect Jonathan? 2 days later, Maggie decided to look beyond family for answers. She drove out to see Paul Benton, one of Daniel's old friends who had worked on the farm for years before retiring. Paul lived in a small, weathered house on the edge of town. His wife answered the door, then called him from the back. He came out wiping his hands on a rag, his hair thinner but his eyes the same sharp blue. Maggie, he said, smiling faintly. Haven't seen you in a while. I need to ask you something about Daniel, she said. About the day he died. Paul's smile faded. All right. Come in. They sat at his kitchen table, a pot of coffee between them. Maggie told him about the letter, about her suspicions, about the arguments Jonathan might have had with Daniel. Paul was quiet for a long time before speaking. I didn't want to believe it back then. Still don't. But I saw the tractor after it happened. The brake line didn't wear through, it was cut. Clean. Like with a blade. Maggie's stomach dropped. You're sure? Paul nodded slowly. Told the sheriff at the time. He said it could have been an accident, tools lying around, someone not paying attention. But I've fixed enough tractors to know the difference. Maggie gripped her coffee cup so hard her knuckles whitened. If the brake line was cut, then it wasn't an accident. Paul looked at her carefully. If you're thinking Jonathan, be careful, Maggie. He's not a boy anymore. He's a man who knows how to get what he wants. That night, as she lay awake, one thought refused to leave her mind. If Jonathan had something to do with Daniel's death, why did he let her raise them for free all these years? It didn't add up. Unless he had been waiting for the right moment to take everything. The morning after her talk with Paul Benton, Maggie couldn't eat. The smell of coffee turned her stomach. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's smiling face beside the tractor, and then imagined him alone, realizing in the last seconds that the brakes wouldn't hold. She drove into town without calling ahead and parked outside Emily's small apartment building. It was an old brick place, the kind of building where the stairwell always smelled faintly of dust and someone's burnt toast. Emily answered the door in jeans and a loose sweater, her hair pulled into a messy bun. Maggie, is everything okay? No, Maggie said bluntly. We need to talk. Now. Emily stepped back to let her in, but she looked uneasy. Jonathan's not here. I'm not here for Jonathan. Maggie walked into the small living room and turned to face her. I went to see Paul Benton. Emily froze. Why? He told me the brake line on your father's tractor was cut. Deliberately. Emily swallowed hard, her hands twisting together. Maggie. Was it Jonathan? Maggie demanded. Did you know? Emily shook her head, but her eyes darted away. I don't know what happened. I just know Dad and Jonathan argued a lot that last year. And the day before the accident, I heard them shouting in the barn. What about? Maggie pressed. Emily hesitated, then said, Dad told Jonathan he wasn't ready to take over the farm. That he was going to put everything in your name until Jonathan proved himself. The air seemed to thicken between them. That would give Jonathan a reason, Maggie said quietly. A reason to. No. Emily said sharply. You can't say that. He's my brother. He's my nephew, Maggie said, her voice tight. But if he did this, I need to know. Emily's eyes filled with tears. If you knew the whole story, Maggie, you might not forgive me either. Maggie stared at her. What did you do, Emily? But Emily shook her head and whispered, I can't, before retreating into the kitchen. A moment later, Maggie heard the back door close. Driving home, Maggie gripped the wheel so hard her hands ached. Emily's words weren't just guilt, they were warning. If both of them had something to hide, she wasn't just fighting for the land anymore. She was fighting to untangle whatever knot of lies had strangled the family since the day Daniel died. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the fields, she sat on the porch staring at the hawthorn tree in the distance. Its branches twisted in the wind like reaching fingers. Daniel's words from the letter echoed in her head, trust no one completely, not even family. 2 months later, they were in court. The small-town courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and paper. Maggie sat at the plaintiff's table beside her lawyer, Ruth Avery, a sharp-eyed woman with silver hair and a calm voice that could cut like glass when she needed it. Jonathan and Emily sat across the aisle with their own lawyer, a tall man in a tailored suit who looked like he belonged in a big city. Jonathan looked confident, even relaxed. Emily didn't. She kept glancing toward Maggie, but never for long. The judge entered, and everyone stood. From the first minute, the case was brutal. Jonathan's lawyer argued that Maggie had been given only guardianship over the property, not ownership. That Daniel's intention was for the land to pass to his children once they were of age. He spoke about Maggie's sacrifices almost like they were irrelevant. Kind acts, yes, but not legal claims. When it was her turn, Ruth laid out the other side, that Daniel had entrusted Maggie with the farm's future because he believed she would protect it. That she had worked it, maintained it, and paid its debts for over 2 decades. But then came the moment Maggie had dreaded. Jonathan's lawyer called Emily to the stand. Maggie's stomach tightened as Emily walked up, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. She looked small in the witness chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Emily, the lawyer began gently, can you tell the court what you believe your father intended for the farm? Emily's voice was soft. He wanted it to stay in the family. He wanted me and Jonathan to have it. Did he ever tell you he wanted Maggie to own it outright? Emily shook her head. No. He said she'd take care of it until we could. It felt like a blow to the chest. Maggie kept her face still, but inside she was reeling. Then came the knife twist. Emily, the lawyer said, you've lived with Maggie for most of your life. Do you believe she's ever tried to manipulate you or Jonathan regarding the land? Maggie's heart lurched. Emily hesitated just long enough for the air in the room to go cold. Yes, Emily said. There was a murmur in the courtroom. Jonathan sat very still, his eyes fixed on Maggie. Ruth objected, but the judge allowed Emily to continue. She's always made us feel like the farm was hers. Like we owed her for raising us. She made it clear that if we wanted to change anything about it, we'd be hurting her. Maggie stared at her niece, unable to believe the words were coming from her. When Jonathan took the stand, he looked the judge directly in the eye as he spoke. My father left me a will, he said. It's dated the day before he died. In it, he leaves the property to me and Emily. I have it here. He pulled a folded document from his briefcase. It looked aged, the ink slightly smudged. As the lawyer handed it to the judge, Maggie's pulse quickened. The smudges, something about them was familiar. Then she remembered, the pen in Daniel's letterbox, the one that had leaked ink when she touched it. The smudges looked exactly the same. Her lawyer cross-examined, but Jonathan was smooth, careful. He admitted he'd kept the will private until now to avoid unnecessary family conflict. When court adjourned for the day, Maggie walked out into the grey afternoon, the sound of traffic muffled by the pounding in her ears. Ruth caught up with her on the steps. We need to challenge the will. If it's forged, we can prove it. How? Maggie asked. Ruth gave her a pointed look. Do you still have that letter from your brother? Yes. Then we'll start there. Handwriting analysis. Ink dating. If Jonathan forged that will after Daniel's death, we'll show the court. That night, alone in the farmhouse, Maggie sat at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of her again. She thought of Jonathan's steady voice in court, Emily's eyes avoiding hers, and the smudged ink on the so-called will. Her brother's voice seemed to whisper through the years, "Trust no one completely, not even family." And for the first time, she wondered not just how far Jonathan would go to take the land, but how far she would go to keep it. The day after court adjourned, Maggie drove straight to the city with Daniel's letter sealed in a protective envelope. Her lawyer, Ruth Avery, had arranged for a handwriting and ink dating expert to examine both the letter and the supposed last will Jonathan had presented in court. The office smelled faintly of old paper and chemicals. The expert, a calm man with wire-rimmed glasses named Dr. Lewis, worked silently for over an hour, comparing strokes, magnifying details, and jotting notes. When he finally looked up, his expression was grave. "The will Jonathan produced," Dr. Lewis said, "was not signed on the date it claims. The ink and paper are both consistent with materials from after your brother's death." Maggie's breath caught. "So it's a forgery?" "Yes," Dr. Lewis said. "And whoever forged it had access to your brother's personal handwriting samples to copy his style." She thought of the wooden box, the envelope with her name, the photograph. Jonathan had had that box for years. He would have had everything he needed to fake Daniel's signature. The next court date arrived quickly. The tension in the small courtroom felt heavier than the wood of its benches. Ruth presented the expert's findings with quiet precision. She showed the judge the matching ink smudges between Jonathan's will and the leaking pen from Daniel's box. She explained the forensic timeline. Piece by piece, the careful image Jonathan had built began to fray. Jonathan's lawyer objected repeatedly, but Ruth stayed focused, dismantling his case in slow, methodical strokes. When Jonathan took the stand again, he was less composed than before. "Why would I forge my own father's will?" he demanded. "To take control of the land earlier than he intended," Ruth said evenly. "Because you knew Daniel planned to leave it in Maggie's name until you proved yourself." Jonathan's jaw clenched. "That's a lie." "Then why," Ruth asked, "was the pen used to sign this will found in your possession, inside a box that also contained Daniel's private letters?" Jonathan's gaze flicked to Maggie for a fraction of a second. She didn't look away. During a recess, Maggie found herself standing by the courthouse steps when Emily approached her. The wind whipped strands of hair across Emily's face. "You have to stop this," Emily said. Maggie's voice was tight. "Stop defending him. He forged that will, Emily." Emily's eyes filled, but her voice stayed low. "You don't understand. He's all I have." "You have me," Maggie said. "No," Emily said after a pause. "Not if you win. If you win, I lose him." Maggie's throat felt thick. "Emily, what did you mean, that I might not forgive you either?" Emily looked away. "That night, the night before Dad died, Jonathan came to me. He said Dad was going to shut him out, and he needed my help. I didn't know what he meant until the next day. But by then it was too late." "You knew," Maggie whispered. "I suspected," Emily said, her voice breaking. "And I didn't say anything. I told myself it wasn't my place. I told myself I didn't know for sure. But I knew." The words hit like stones. Maggie turned away, staring out at the street below. "You both betrayed him," she said quietly. Emily didn't deny it. Back in court, Ruth's cross-examination finished cutting the ground out from under Jonathan's defense. By the end of the day, even the judge's questions carried an edge of doubt toward him. But Jonathan still had one more card to play. As proceedings wrapped, he stood and addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor, even if the court finds this particular will invalid, the fact remains. My father never filed any legal document transferring ownership of the property to Maggie. She's been squatting on land that belongs to me and my sister." Ruth was ready. She held up Daniel's sealed letter. "We have his written statement of intent. Combined with her 20 years of stewardship and financial investment, It establishes a constructive trust in her favor. The judge said he would take all evidence under advisement. Decision would be rendered in a week. That night, Maggie returned to the farmhouse feeling both exhausted and restless. She walked the property in the dark, the moon silvering the frost on the grass. Her boots crunched in the quiet. She ended up near the old hawthorn tree. Its branches loomed overhead, twisted and gnarled, roots breaking through the soil like bones. For reasons she couldn't explain, she knelt there and brushed away some of the dirt at the base. Her fingers hit something metallic. It was a small tin box, rusted at the edges. She pried it open with her penknife. Inside was a folded piece of paper, another will. This one was dated months before Daniel's death, witnessed and signed, leaving everything, the land, the house, the farm equipment, to Maggie Ellison. Her hands shook as she held it. Daniel had left her the land outright. Jonathan had never had a claim. And Daniel had hidden it here, beneath the tree, as if he'd known it might need to be found later. The final day in court was quiet at first. Jonathan sat rigid, Emily beside him, pale and distant. Maggie felt the weight of the tin box in her bag. When Ruth presented the newly discovered will, the courtroom seemed to still. The signatures were verified on the spot, real, uncontested, and legally binding. Jonathan's lawyer tried to argue that its late discovery was suspicious, but Ruth countered with the fact that Maggie had found it on family property, in a location consistent with Daniel's own warning in the letter, "The land will keep you safe." The judge's ruling was swift. Maggie Ellison is hereby confirmed as the sole legal owner of the Hawthorne property. Outside, reporters from the local paper swarmed for quotes. Maggie said nothing. Jonathan stormed past them, refusing to answer questions. Emily lingered for a moment, her expression unreadable, before following him. That night, the farmhouse felt both emptier and heavier. Maggie walked the halls, touching the worn banister, the familiar frames on the walls. She had won. The land was hers. But victory felt hollow. She stepped outside into the crisp night and made her way to the hawthorn tree. The ground she had disturbed was still loose. She stood there for a long time, listening to the wind in the branches. In the dark, she whispered, "It's safe now, Danny. I kept my promise." The wind shifted, rustling the leaves like a sigh. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, in Emily's handwriting. "Maggie, I'm sorry for everything. I can't undo what I did, and I can't choose between you and him. I'm leaving. Don't look for me. Emily." Maggie folded it and set it in the drawer with Daniel's letter. In the months that followed, she worked the farm alone. The land was quiet, the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones. Sometimes, as she walked the fields, she'd find herself glancing toward the tree, half expecting to see Daniel there, leaning against the trunk, smiling. The farm survived, just as he'd wanted. But it was a lonely kind of survival. One spring morning, she planted flowers at the base of the hawthorn tree. As she knelt in the dirt, she thought about the people who had stood here before her, her parents, Daniel, the children she had raised. She pressed the soil down gently, then sat back on her heels. The land was hers. But so was the silence. And she understood now what Daniel had meant. Some promises keep you alive, but they take pieces of you with them. So, what would you have done in Maggie's place? Would you have fought for the land, or walked away? Tell me in the comments. And if you love stories full of family secrets, jaw-dropping twists, and endings you'll never forget, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because the next story might just be darker.